moving on to our fourth and final in this series in regards to Belgian ales and Trappist ales, we are talking today about Brewery Ardennes and the Bière de Garde. This specifically aged in bourbon barrels from I believe these were from Finger Lakes Distilling.
Yes, I believe he gets not all of his barrels.
Yeah.
Can't confirm nor deny that, but a lot of their barrels come from the Finger Lakes Distilling. Flavors of malt and oak from its time in Finger Lakes Distilling bourbon barrels.
Okay.
Confirmed.
So Bière de Garde, their Grand Cru Belgian-Style ale. And this is from Brewery Ardennes. So if you just head down the 90, about 2 hours, because that's how we measure time here in New York.
There you go. How far down?
Right. And then they're right just outside of Geneva. And actually, if you draw a line due west from Belhurst Castle, they're right back there in the countryside on this beautiful estate. And they're brewing up a storm there, doing some great things. I can relate to them because they have the same last name as me, different spelling, no relation. They're our brand new 2023 New York Belgian-Style Brewery of the Year for the New York International Beer Competition. And they are an 8-time medalist. Bronze, silver, gold, you name it. They've won them all.
And just humble, easy to talk to, welcoming people, which to me is quintessential of Belgian beer. Of all the previous podcasts in regards to Belgian styles and Trappist beers, and we won't have to get too far into that because it's none of that. It's right here in good old New York, Geneva, New York. But there's this sense of community, sense of welcoming. Trappist beers, a lot of Belgian beers are meant to be around the dinner table, welcoming someone to your home. You would, give them a table beer. There's this essence of community when you talk about Belgian beer. And I actually found Brewery Ardennes. I said earlier on accident. I mean, it wasn't on accident. I definitely looked it up, and wasn't like I was walking through the woods and I just ended up with a Bière de Garde in my hand. Yeah, it was.
How'd this get here?
Big Ellis Brewing Company. They're from Long Island, and they had won a bunch of awards and took over. I forget which brewery it was, but they bought a brewery in the Finger Lakes, and it was they were my destination. And like most of us, once we're out and about, next thing I do is throw things in the GPS to see what else is around. And this Brewery Ardennes popped up, and an article about them popped up, and we go there. And the first thing you do is you get out in the parking lot. And there's beautiful, large grounds. And you just look at this building. You're kind of transported.
It's beautiful.
It's just gorgeous. It's, I believe, in the 1900s. So we're talking 120 years ago. This was a 15,000 square foot sheep farm, and it sustained 2 major fires, I believe, in like the mid 1910s. Let's call it 1917. You could fact check me. I doubt it's 17, but
I have 12 on my list.
12? Okay, there you go. But then again, I believe in the 30s. So like 1930, 1932, I'll throw a dart at that number.
30 sticks.
30? All right, 30, there you go. 2 large fires, and then basically all that's left today is their tap room, which they have fantastic food. But, you walk, you look at this thing, and it's one of those, I got to take a picture. Because it just looks like, a European style building.
Yes.
It's not, when we go into breweries today, especially in Western New York, Buffalo, I love the fact that we are rehabilitating some old factories and storage space, but you basically aren't getting transported other than to, the back room of the Western New York brewery. Now, there are some gorgeous breweries in Western New York, but none of them are in 120-year-old sheep farms. So you look at this, you're like, wow. I go through the door. There's, I won't say elderly gentleman, even though I just did. I'll just say somebody that I could tell was older than me, just so happy to welcome me there. And later I come to find out it's the brewer and owner's father. Like, that's what he does now. The father and mother are the hosts. They greet you. And then, it's a husband and wife couple, both Cornellians. They graduated from Cornell. And, I believe Derek was an aerospace engineer and said, forget that, let's just make some good beer. And, he spent some time, I believe, in California. He won some national brewing, home brewing awards, some local brewing awards, came back, and, his wife was graduate of like the hotel program of Cornell. And, I just, as somebody that's been in the biz for a while myself and have opened some places, you could tell passion, attention to detail, and they had everything. They checked every single box. I mean, I didn't go in there and take my first sip of beer and wasn't, I fell in love with the entire package. The beer was great. We tried some world-class beers on these podcasts, and, these guys are close with some of them, but, it's the full package. You walk in there, they have an extremely talented chef that provides traditional Belgian fare. You have all of these Belgian-inspired ales. Their avant-garde collection is basically when they start doing some IPAs or fruited sours, but even then, there's still this essence of Belgium and some funky kind of yeasty flavors with it. So that is my love poem to Brewery Ardennes. Derek has been great to me. We've done 2 different collaborations now. I also pour for their at the Tap and Craft Festival, which will be coming up October 21st. I'll be pouring Brewery Ardennes beers exclusively at my little portion of the festival. I just love them. They embody the Belgian beer as well as the Belgian culture. So on to the actual beer. All of that for a Bière de Garde. We did 2 years ago, we brewed a Bière de Garde. If you know anything about Magic Bear here, I try to get the name bear into any of our beers. But it's actually a French style. It falls within the Belgian farmhouse ales, but Bière de Garde is originally from northeast France, which is the border to Belgium. And I see Jason with one of his beer fact cards ready to chime in or test my knowledge here.
You're hitting. There's nothing I'm going to have to add to this yet. So, yeah.
Oh, all right. So fact checking me. Okay. So let's talk about the name Bière de Garde. Bière de Garde. I took French, so I always try to overpronounce. I've said in other podcasts, I'm Italian, and go to any Italian while they're talking, let them, bring up the words cacio e pepe or something like a Parmigiano Reggiano. It goes from Western New York nasal A accent to, oh, you're from Italy now. And whenever I speak French, it's actually to a fault. I've done a lot of traveling abroad. My wife would always kind of elbow me. She's like, you don't have an accent. Stop speaking with an accent. It's insulting to the people. I was like, what do you mean to the people? That was kind of my retort. I was like, you're referring to them as the people. I'm trying to be amongst them. So Bière de Garde or Bière de Garde, it's a beer that has been kept. So if you think about the farmhouse ale category, we were talking about Orval, and we kind of, it's hard, like I said, with all Belgian styles to really put them in categories. The styles are more for us as consumers, and if you're judging a beer, than they are to the brewer who's just trying to make an artisanal product. So you have Bière de Garde, which is a subset of farmhouse ales. So what does that mean? Farmhouse kind of just means, hey, we are brewing this to have a thirst-quenching sustenance and something to provide to our farmhands. Now, this was the French equivalent because saisons, meaning season, it was brewed in one season for another. Bière de Garde was meant to be kept so that you had it on hand for your people. Differences between saisons and Bière de Garde. Now, saison can be, typically it's lighter, a more pale ale, and it could get some notes of a little bit more amber. There are actually 3 distinct subsets of the Bière de Garde style. You have your blonde, which is pale, and then you have your ambre, or your amber, and then you have your brune, or your brown. So it's basically, of those 3 different veins that you would be brewing. The other interesting thing about Bière de Garde, since it's kept, it is accepted to brew it with either an ale or lager yeast. So a lot of times lager yeasts are used because you also kind of do one of 2 things with Bière de Gardes. These are kind of like the hybrid beers of Germany, like Kolsch and alt beers, where they use one type of yeast strain but then use a procedure that is not typical of that yeast strain. So if you use a lager strain, and then lagers like lower temperatures, If you use a lager strain, you should treat it a little bit more like an ale so that you get some more of those yeast flavors, because really lager is meant to have less yeast flavors, and as we've discussed in previous podcasts, those are the phenolics or spicy characteristics, and esters, which are the slight fruity characteristics that come from yeast. So with a lager, you don't really want much of those. You want malt flavor and bitterness from the hops to balance it, and that's about it. So with this being a farmhouse Belgian French style beer, you're going to want some of those yeast flavors. So if you use a lager strain, put it a little bit higher temperature, give it a little bit more of the ale treatment so that it gets a little bit more of those flavors. However, if you use the ale yeast, flip that, reverse it, treat it a little bit more like a lager. Let it store for a little bit longer, brew it at a slighter temperature so you're not getting an overpronounced yeast characteristic. So like we've been repeating over and over, the key is balance. Now, we have a nice balanced beer, then we do something like put it in a bourbon barrel. And it's very American of us because, bourbon is an American product. There's distinguishing factors to make something a bourbon, but we won't go into those. But the one I will touch on is to be a bourbon, you are in new charred oak barrels. So the key word is new. So you cannot make bourbon from a previously used bourbon barrel. So now you have a surplus of bourbon barrels, and all these different bourbon barrels either need a home, they either, you start planting plants in them, but then the beer industry was just like, hey man, there's a lot of these bourbon barrels, why don't we throw some beer in there and take some of the nuances? So bourbon barrel aging kind of does two things. One, it allows you to age the beer. So this beer that has been kept has then been kept even longer, which develops some of the characters. And anytime you age a beer, just think of fruit when it ages. So if you have a plum, it's now going to be more like a prune. If you have a grape, it's more like a raisin. If you have a cherry, it's more like a craisin, or cranberry, more like a craisin, and the cherry is like a dried cherry, and so forth and so on. You also, with bourbon barrels, you get some of the previous content, so you're going to get bourbon, and with bourbon comes your oaky, slightly smoky, and then kind of vanilla flavors that come from the barrel. So you're going to get some caramel, some vanilla, and whatever bourbon you're using, you should get some nuances of that bourbon in the beer. So this Bière de Garde the style got a little bit more popular later in the 90s. I think around like 1970, there was, and this is the hardest thing to pronounce, I don't know if it's Duck or Doik. I think it's Duyck. They had a beer called, Genlin, Genlain. So this Genlin really popularized it, and then what they started doing was corked and caged bottles, which this was from Brewery Ardennes. So very ornate, champagne-style bottle with the cork and the cage over the top of it. And it started to kind of appeal to, college students and other people because the college regions in France and Belgium at that time, these were more affluent people. Now, we talk about people in college, we're talking Broke and Busch Light. Back then, if you were going to college, you were doing very well for yourself, or your family was. So they were looking for something a little bit more pinkies up type of deal. So when they saw these bottles and were enjoying them, they kind of caught on. And then other breweries started brewing Bière de Gardes, and some would specialize in the blonde version. Some would be more into their brune. By the looks of this Bière de Garde, this is more of the brune. I had popped this bottle and had to ask Jason if he heard gunshot, because enough carbonation in this beer where you always want to be careful with these corked and caged. The reason the cages are on there is because this is a very highly carbonated beer, and that cork flew out, and I am glad, I didn't it wasn't a Red Ryder BB gun and I shot my eye out. So it did end up across the room, and you can immediately just start smelling some of the beautiful aromas. So as I swirl my glass and give Jason a cheers, we're going to talk about those aromas. Cheers, sir.
Cheers.
So I'm not going to go and talk about pink elephants so that you immediately think of a pink elephant. You tell me what you're smelling, and then I will tell you what I'm smelling, and there's no right or wrong answers.
Well, instantly I get the bourbon barrel.
So
I get some oaky.
Now, that's what I like hearing, because a lot of times, especially in wine, people go immediately like red currant, black currant, gooseberry. Well, very broad. You started very broad. You said bourbon barrel. But what does that smell like? So within bourbon barrel, dissect it a little bit more for me. What are you getting from the bourbon? What subsidiary smells, aromas do you get when you say bourbon? Because to me, it's kind of like saying this beer smells like beer. Because if you said bourbon smells like bourbon.
But this smells like the bourbon barrel, so I get the oaky. But I do get cherry, dark cherry.
All right. Definitely picking up on cherry. And like I said, start broad, go and start narrowing down. So even if you didn't get cherry, there's dark fruits. We talked about that with our Belgian quadruple. Dark fruits meaning could be plums, cherries, figs, just, dark fruits as opposed to your lighter fruits. Yeah. And then get down into it. Is it more of a cherry or is it more of a plum, or is it more of a raisin?
I guess
so to me, bourbon, because a lot of barrels that are used are either rum barrels or bourbon barrels. Every now and then you'll see some gin barrels. But what I usually get from bourbon barrels is I get this kind of vanilla, almost slightly butterscotch caramel smell to it.
Okay.
And that very well just could be how I perceive it. But, I get those, I definitely get those fruity cherry notes. But oak, to me, obviously smells like wood. Like a good barbecue has those like kind of smoky flavors. But a lot of oak, there's, it's actually, I think, vanillin. So not vanilla, but vanillins are a property that gives you the vanilla flavor. There's a lot of that in oak and a lot of that in the bourbon barrel. So that's why a lot of bourbon has like a secondary note of vanilla. So I'm getting a lot of the vanilla, butterscotch, kind of, not so much butterscotch as caramel. That kind of mixed with a nice fruity kind of like I talked about with the quadruple where it had that fruitcake kind of very, barley, dark cereal kind of smell. And then, with the hint of red dark fruits, but then drizzled with vanilla and caramel.
After I huffed it about 10 times, I finally took a sip, and the first thing I get is vanilla on the flavor. So the bourbon barrel on the nose, the oak on the nose, vanilla
very
on the
crisp.
taste.
You taste that carbonation.
I want to say toffee, but it's not sweet like toffee, which may be picking up the caramel.
There you go. Not too boozy. One thing I usually don't like, unless it's very, again, Belgian beers being all about balance. Barrel aged, especially like bourbon and rum, you have, because you could just do an oak barrel.
Sure.
It just doesn't have to be something with previous contents in it. As a matter of fact, before the steel keg, it was all barrel aged. That's what beer came in. It came in barrels. That's why they're still referred to as half barrel and so on and so forth. The balance is there. I get the bourbon, but it's not, some of these bourbon barrel aged beers is just like, it's an uppercut. It's just, hey man, you like bourbon? And hopefully the answer is yes. Because if not, it kind of overshadows the base beer. And the balance in Belgian beers and this style of beer should also, that's why I think Ardennes does a nice job, because there's a very good balance here.
Yes.
It's not overly bourbon-y, boozy, or too much barrel. The barrel complements the Bière de Garde, and the Bière de Garde complements the barrel. And that's what you should have. As expected with the pop of this cork, you taste it's almost prickly on your, that's called the carbonic bite. Okay, there's a lot of CO2 in here, which this is bottle conditioned, which just basically means they allow the yeast to continue working in the bottle, which would then, because, we talked about Orville in an earlier episode about how the ABV changes and stuff. Well, when something's bottle conditioning, how much alcohol is in there when you put it in, but then when the yeast continues to do its job and create more CO2 and more alcohol, you then need to understand that there's going to be a little bit higher ABV. Now, Trappist breweries and people that have been around for a while, there's a lot of math that goes into brewing. It's a science, of course, so the handmaiden of science is math. So when you start doing your calculations, knowing how much viable yeast and time you expect there to be, you can kind of estimate what the final ABV will be after a little while. But for the most part, there is a little bit of guessing game in there. It'll definitely be off a 0.1 to 2% ABV on these.
Well, this comes in at a nice healthy 6.2, which is right in the middle of the road where it should be. And like you said, it doesn't pick up a lot of the boozy textures or flavors from the bourbon. You do get a little of the dry oakiness. It definitely has a dry finish to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you take a sip of this, and it's almost like you didn't sip anything. Mm-hmm. A lot of that is just the carbonation as well. When you have that prickly kind of high carbonated beer hit your palate, it almost just bounces off. I think of it almost like that hot skillet when you throw a couple and the water just beads up on it, and you just throw a little water in there and it starts to dance off. It's just that's kind of what I think of the high carbonation and a very crisp beer. When you think of astringent, it's almost to the point where it can't stick to your tongue because it's just bouncing off. It's mm-hmm. It's just that few drops of water kind of dancing around in a hot cast iron or stainless steel skillet.
I like that. That's a good reference.
I get a little bit of nuttiness, it kind of has this like chestnut over, I don't know, maybe it's the Italian in me, that roasted chestnut flavor.
Okay.
That's just coming from those darker malts, but it's one of those, you don't get too much of like a green hop bitterness. Mm-hmm. There's like a bitter finish to it that helps balance some of the sweetness that comes from this malt. However, again, it's just got an overall balance to it, and then you kind of finish with those barrel notes. So it's nice because the aromas to me were immediately barrel, with the vanilla and slight caramel notes, a little bit of some fruit in there. So you get that on the nose, you'd be like, oh yeah, this was aged in a bourbon barrel. But then you take a sip, and it's not this overwhelmingly bourbon flavor.
Not at
you
all.
get the base beer, but then what's nice is it finishes with a little bit of that bourbon essence. Not so much like someone went and poured a shot of bourbon in my beer,
right?
But they just waved the bottle of bourbon over the top.
Flavor, and it lingers on the back of my tongue especially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a dry finish.
Yeah, these are good dinner beers.
This is nice.
My one buddy always makes fun of me because he used to ask me, like, what's a good beer for dinner? I'm going to dinner. I should bring it to dinner. And I always say Bière de Garde. He's like, why do you pick beers that I'll never be able to find at the grocery store? He's like, I got to go to like 2 different places. Like, well, now I got to go to Magic Bear. I got Bière de Gardes. But
it's a good selling point.
Yeah.
I mean, come on now.
It's a way to get you in the door. But it's one of those beers that, the high carbonation, the malt characteristic. Now, this just goes for Bière de Gardes, not necessarily the bourbon barrel aged. Bourbon barrel aged, I always say, is more like have the it's like your cognac with your cigar. Mm-hmm. It's more of an after dinner with your smoking jacket by the fire. But the Bière de Garde, it has this malty base. Even the lighter versions of it are more malt focused than they are hop focused.
Okay.
So to me, maltier beers go better with dinner. Because if you think about dinner, it's usually I'm talking more your traditional protein-based dinners where there's some sort of seared or roasted meat, whether it's barbecued, smoked, pan-seared, or dry roasted or braised. These flavors kind of have the similar aspect of the malty notes, kind of just like bread. I mean, beer and bread, very similar, but this is a darker, bread crust. This is kind of like your pumpernickel, spicy bread. So like those need something with a little bit more flavor, a little bit more character than something that you would be starting as an appetizer. So to me, Thanksgiving dinner, you talk about rich gravies and you've got mashed potatoes and this, that, the other. This goes very well with that. If you have a dinner that where meat's the star, because to me this is going to overpower a salad. If you're having, a light salad for dinner, or if you're doing something of light preparation like a poached salmon or anything like that, even your lighter pastas like, a pasta aioli or something that's just like a butter garlic sauce, this might be a little bit more overpowering. But you talk about a nice red sauce, those things that call for like red wines. This is something that would stand up to, it matches the malty flavor that you get in the pasta itself.
Yep.
But then it has a little bit more of those bold flavors that you get in a red wine that match well with the more acidic and robust sauces. And then, anything that is going to have a nice crust on it, if we're talking about a leg of lamb, or you're, even just taking that pulled pork that has a nice bark on it, and you're having that, something like this is just going to really, really taste well with it. And then that carbonation really comes through and cleans your palate out. And then, you add any sort of potato, malt and potato. That's why you have malt vinegar on a lot of French fries.
Yep.
You just, your meat and potatoes go well with a darker, maltier beer.
Yep.
And when I think of something that's well balanced, this is kind of like, the Martzens or the Oktoberfest. Little, like I said, you can use a lager yeast in here, which makes it a little bit more, a little more thin on the palate, and a little bit more crisp. But it really just drinks perfectly with any sort of meat dish.
It's a good pairing. Like you said, from the pasta standpoint, even like a Malbec or a Syrah or something like that, it really matches. Take the bourbon barreling effect out of this, and just do the Bière de Garde itself. It's really good for a pasta dish. Beer and pasta, and people don't usually think of that, but you're right. It does drink a little bit like a wine, especially with the dry finish on the end, like a Syrah, like a Malbec. So it would be. It's very comparable to those wines.
And then, if you think cheeses, if it was just a straight Bière de Garde, this to me is more like an aged cheddar. It's something like a more dry, something like the Dubliner style cheddar would be great with this. Even something like a smoked Gouda or anything smoked, just because it has a little bit darker flavor.
Yeah.
But then when you add the bourbon, one of the key principles of pairing is just to match intensity. So the bourbon adds a more intense flavor, and that would then, for me, be that you can kick up the cheese. So I know we were joking earlier about Rochefort versus Roquefort cheese, big stinky blue Stilton or something like that. But anytime I think of bourbon barrel-aged beers, another bourbon barrel-aged style is barley wines are often aged in barrels, and those are powerful enough and enough going on that they stand up to some of your heavier blue cheeses. So where I think the base beer would do well with kind of your middle-of-the-road, medium, sharp cheeses, like a sharp goat cheese would be great with this. Okay. Once we add this bourbon note to it, to me, those caramel notes, like if you think about, the most decadent charcuterie boards you can imagine, you've got caramelized pecans drizzled over the top of, whether it's a brie or a stinky, delicious blue cheese. I know stinky and delicious don't usually go together, but that funk. I talked about those barnyard, those funky, rustic blue cheese flavors. They're powerful. They need somebody to put them in their place, right. And this is one of those beers. Yeah, It's a Bière de Garde. It's gonna. This guy, it's in the bourbon barrel, so it's ready to stand up to that challenge of a very powerful cheese or a very robust meal. And, Brewery Ardennes just coming through with a very nuanced, well-balanced beer. Nothing surprising coming from Derek and his brother, the cellarman of the operation. So they do a fine job, and just a very tasty beer.
So just to give them a little FaceTime, because they're so local, 570 Snell Road, they're out in Geneva. You would be remiss if you didn't take the time to go out there and enjoy that campus. The first time I ever visited them, it was after dark. So the ambiance outside is even incredible. and then you go in. Stacy and Derek, very inviting. They invite the open European concept where it's not so much the stuffy bar condensed on top of each other look. They really like that open, almost a family feel to a brewery setting. It's very wide open there, and they have such a I'm not going to say a wide variety. I'm going to say a nice variety, like you said earlier, from their sours to their, their singles, their doubles, their triples, even the quad that they have there. They've got so many great selections available. If you have the opportunity to talk to Derek, when I went there, Stacy was the one who I talked to at length, who filled me in on a lot of what they were doing there. I'm in love with the place, and I usually can't wait to get back out there to see them again. So, and I know that you're going to be working with them. We'll be talking in our next series. And then with that said, I can't thank you enough for this series. It's been 4 episodes up, 4 episodes down, and some great information that we're putting out there to our listeners. And I appreciate the fact you reached out to me, and it was either me or Joe Rogan. So you chose me, and I feel honored.
No, absolutely. I think what you're doing is great, Jason. It's it's an honor to sit here with you. I love to talk, as you can tell, and when we were kicking around different names, just like Bière de Garde, we snuck the name Bear in there, and I wanted to sneak the name Bear into barely getting started, because there's just so much to talk about when it comes to beer, and that's one of the things when I meet new people. There's this common just excitement about beer and all things beer, and there's just a lot to talk about. And, you can get deeper and deeper and more tangents, and then off of those tangents come stories, and from personal stories, you just have memories that just start to overflow. And that's one of the reasons I love beer. And, I really appreciate what you do with the podcast. And I reached out because I always wanted to, talk a little bit more, but I just kind of have a full plate. And thought I would run it by you, and figured, hey, you know what? If I give this guy enough beer and sit down and we enjoy a few together, maybe we can, just kind of talk about beer. Nothing too intense. Just, we're just barely getting started.
Yeah, it's the absolute greatest play on words. I can't thank you enough for again coming to me with your ideas and the education that you're bringing to everybody. I'm learning a lot as we go along, even, being able to sit up at night and research coming into this series of 4 episodes, and I already can't wait until we come up with the next 4. So
yeah, I'm thinking, I do classes here at Magic Bear, and, one of the most popular ones is the Blissfully Belgian, where we kind of just talk about Belgian beer culture, and we do pretty much what we did in this series of podcasts.
Yeah.
And, I do those for different beer cultures, and then we do some about styles. So, I would love to dip into the German beer culture or the British and Irish cultures, but we can also find ourselves enjoying an array of single style. I mean, I can, pull 15 different stouts off of the shelf, and we'll just make sure we have an Uber for us.
That's right. And if you're coming here for an event, which you absolutely have to do, social media wise, at Magic Bear Beer.
Correct.
On Instagram, and then what is it on Facebook?
Same thing. So everything is, we're Magic Bear. What do? It's beer. So Magic Bear Beer. That is Instagram, Facebook, and that is also the website. So www.magicbearbeer.com, so you can learn a lot more about us. As well as up there, we have our online market that has all of those classes that I was talking about. We do about 2 a month. So Magic Bear Beer, we are Magic Bear Beer Cellar. But when you search Magic Bear Beer, I hope you find some good stuff.
Yeah. And then we're recording this on Tuesday, and just a few hours away from Tuesday in Larkin. What do they call it? Food Truck Tuesday?
Tuesdays.
In Larkinville. And you literally, it's 100 yards down the street, 599 Seneca Street. And stop in, whether before or after or during. Sometimes the weather doesn't want to cooperate. If you're down here and you get caught, come on down for a beer and say hi to Craig. Altobello is my proud to have him as a partner on this project. I am Jason Ettinger, and we are barely getting started.
That's right. Cheers.
Cheers.